When Big Shaq visited the grave of his late father, it wasn't just a tribute, it was a revelation. The camera captured every raw, unexpected moment, as Big Shaq uncovered buried secrets that could rewrite everything. The truth wasn't just whispered, it was caught on camera for the world to witness. And what Big Shaq said that day, it wasn't just emotional, it sparked a reckoning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun cast long shadows through the towering oaks, their branches tangled like a puzzle against the pale blue sky. The graveyard stretched out, quiet but alive with a rustle of leaves, a chorus of cicadas, and the occasional creak of worn gravestones, shifting under the weight of time. Big Shaq, Shaquille O'Neal to the world. But Shaq to those who truly knew him, stood alone in the heart of it all, his broad frame silhouetted against the dappled light. He wore a simple dark jacket, sleeves rolled up, hands stuffed into his pockets, as if that could somehow ease the heaviness pressing against his chest. His eyes were fixed on one gravestone in particular, the resting place of his late father. The grave was marked by a modest stone, edges worn from years of weather. No elaborate inscription, just a name and 2 dates. But to Shaq, those dates held an entire lifetime of memories, laughter, arguments, and things left unsaid. He remembered his father's voice, a deep rumbling tone that could shake the walls, but also soften into something that comforted a scared boy late at night. Shaq traced the edge of the gravestone with his eyes, recalling the way his father used to say, "You gotta stand tall, son, even when the world tries to knock you down." The sun played tricks on the ground, patterns of light and shadow dancing over the grass. A camera crew lingered nearby, pretending to film the gentle sway of trees. But Shaq knew they were really there for him. Not for the spectacle, but for the story. He'd long since grown used to the silent eyes of cameras, the way they tried to capture the private moments of public figures. But today wasn't about the cameras. Today was about the quiet ache of memory, about reckoning with the past. Shaq's thoughts wandered to his childhood, the days spent on cracked basketball courts, the lessons his father tried to drill into him, not just about the game but about survival. His father had seen things Shaq couldn't fully understand as a child. The double-edged looks from strangers, the subtle shift in tone when they realized who they were talking to. His father carried the weight of those experiences, trying to shield his son from the worst of it, while still preparing him for the battles ahead. There were times when young Shaq would come home confused, bruised not from the game but from words that stung deeper than fists. And his father would sit him down, voice low but urgent, telling him, "Don't let them take your power, son. Don't let them write your story." Shaq let out a slow breath, his gaze steady but distant. The air felt thick with things unsaid, with questions he wished he'd asked when his father was still alive. He could almost hear his voice in the rustling branches, a faint echo urging him to listen, to look closer. The camera crew edged closer, but Shaq ignored them, too wrapped in the pull of memory. He crouched, pressing his palm flat against the cool stone, as if that simple touch could bridge the gap between past and present. In that stillness, a faint sound made him pause. It wasn't the creak of branches or the soft hum of insects. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel path that wound through the graveyard. Shaq stood, his heart tightening, instinctively squaring his shoulders. He turned to see a figure emerging from behind the old oaks. The man was thin, wiry, with a weathered face and a slow, measured walk. His clothes were plain, jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and his eyes held a glint of something that wasn't quite curiosity, more like knowing. The man's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the quiet like a knife. "Your father carried a secret, Shaq," the man said, stepping closer. His tone wasn't threatening, but it wasn't casual either. It was the voice of someone who'd been waiting a long time to say something, a secret that cost him more than anyone knew. Shaq's pulse quickened, the weight of the afternoon suddenly heavier. "Who are you?" he asked, though his voice didn't carry the usual authority that echoed through packed arenas and television screens. It was softer, more uncertain. The man's gaze flicked to the camera crew in the distance, then back to Shaq. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're standing here, listening. There are things you need to know, about him, about what he tried to do before they shut him down." Shaq's breath caught. The words felt like a jolt of electricity, threading through the still air and sparking a dozen questions he hadn't thought to ask. The man reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn leather journal. Its edges cracked and stained with age. He extended it toward Shaq, who hesitated before accepting it. The weight of the journal in his hands felt heavier than it should, like it contained more than just pages, more than just ink, like it held truths that could shake the ground he stood on. "Read it," the man said quietly. "Before the sun goes down, then you'll understand why he couldn't tell you, why he had to keep it hidden." And before Shaq could respond, the man turned, walking away, his figure fading into the shadows of the oaks, leaving Shaq alone with the journal, the gravestone, and the gnawing sense that his father's story wasn't over. Shaq's gaze lingered on the worn leather journal, in his hand, its cracked spine hinting at years of use, secrets soaked into every line. The air had grown heavier, the subtle rustle of leaves now carrying a weight that settled against his shoulders like a silent warning. He turned it over in his palms, feeling the rough texture, trying to decide whether to trust the stranger's words or toss the thing into the shadows. Before he could make up his mind, he heard the gravel crunch again, closer this time. His pulse quickened, his head snapping toward the approaching figure. The man introduced himself with a low, almost conspiratorial tone. "Name's Reuben," he said, stepping fully into the dappled sunlight. His voice was rough around the edges, a tone that felt practiced but strained. His eyes flicked toward the camera crew, then back to Shaq. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came here because you need to know the truth your father couldn't tell you." Shaq squared his shoulders, instinctively stepping between Reuben and the grave. His voice was low but steady. "Why now? Why not before?" The frustration in his tone wasn't just from the intrusion. It was from years of feeling the gaps in his father's story, the unanswered questions that lingered like ghosts in every conversation they never had. Reuben's expression darkened, his eyes darting left and right as though the trees themselves might be listening. "Because they're still watching. Just like they watched your father. Just like they tried to keep him quiet. I was supposed to come sooner, but there were complications." His words trailed off, heavy with implication. He wasn't just speaking about the usual shadows of power. He was hinting at something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of their lives. Shaq felt a chill creep up his spine. "Complications?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Reuben took a slow breath, his gaze fixed on Shaq's face, as though trying to decide how much to say. "Your father wasn't just some man who loved his family and taught his son how to fight through the noise. He was a man who tried to change the game off the court. He found something big, and he tried to blow the whistle. But they buried him before he could speak." Shaq's hands tightened around the journal. His mind was racing, trying to connect dots that had never even looked like dots before. "Who's they?" he asked, his voice low, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Reuben glanced over his shoulder, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Names don't matter. What matters is the power they hold, the way they use it to erase people, to silence stories. Your father was one of the few who had the courage to stand up to them, and it cost him everything." Shaq's breath hitched, the weight of Reuben's words pressing against old scars he thought had healed. His mind flashed back to moments he'd brushed aside, the sudden loss of connections, the stories his father never quite finished telling. He remembered being pulled aside at family gatherings, hushed whispers that stopped the moment he entered the room. This wasn't just a case of a father hiding things from his son. This was something darker, something tangled in layers of power and fear. Reuben's voice cut through the haze. "That journal isn't just a collection of thoughts. It's a map. It's evidence. It points to something your father discovered, something that could bring everything they built crashing down. But you have to read it, and you have to read it today, before the sun sets. After that, it might be too late." Shaq's instincts screamed at him to push Reuben away, to tell him to leave and take his riddles with him. But the journal's weight in his hands felt undeniable. It wasn't just a story, it was his father's voice, calling out from beyond the grave, daring him to uncover what had been hidden for so long. Before Shaq could ask another question, Reuben stepped back, his posture shifting from tense urgency to weary resignation. "I've said enough. I've already stuck my neck out too far. But you," he pointed a thin finger at Shaq's chest, "you've got the reach, the voice, the audience, if you're brave enough to use it." The wind stirred, rustling the leaves, carrying the faint sounds of the crew shifting in the distance. Reuben's eyes met Shaq's one last time, the look in them, a mixture of warning and hope. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps fading into the underbrush. Shaq stood rooted to the spot, journal in hand, watching Reuben's figure disappear into the fading light. His mind was a storm of questions and unease. The cameras kept rolling, oblivious to the weight of the moment, capturing only the silhouette of a man torn between grief and revelation. In the fading afternoon light, Shaq looked down at the journal, its spine cracked like the world it hinted at. He felt the first threads of suspicion weaving through his thoughts, twisting around the foundation of everything he thought he knew. Whatever was in that journal wasn't just about his father, it was about the world his father had tried to warn him about. And as the sun inched lower, casting long shadows across the graveyard, Shaq made a silent vow. He would read it, not just for himself, but for the man whose name was carved into that stone. The story wasn't over. Not yet. Shaq sat in the worn leather seat of his car, parked at the edge of the cemetery, the journal resting on his knees like a fragile relic. His hands hovered over the cover, fingertips brushing the cracked edges, where time and use had left their marks. The camera crew's distant chatter faded into the background, the world narrowing to the weight of the journal and the pounding of his pulse. He opened it carefully, the pages releasing the faint scent of old paper and ink. The handwriting was his father's, bold but uneven, the strokes bearing the weight of urgency, of a man pouring his heart onto paper with little time to spare. Shaq's throat tightened as he read the first few lines, the words a mixture of reflection and confession. His father had written not of victories or accolades, but of quiet struggles, names of men who had shaken his hand in public but whispered against him in secret, deals that were promised but never delivered, opportunities dangled only to be yanked away. His father had been a man caught between worlds, the proud father, the community leader, and the silent witness to a system that refused to see him as anything more than a statistic. One entry in particular caught Shaq's eye. His father described a meeting that took place in the back room of a community center, voices lowered as they discussed plans for a new housing development. At first, Shaq's father had believed it was a genuine effort to uplift the neighborhood, but as the conversations continued, he saw the cracks forming, the subtle language of exclusion, the hidden clauses in the Turkics, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes. They weren't planning to build a better future. They were planning to displace families, erase histories, replace culture with concrete. The betrayal was slow and methodical. His father had tried to push back, to rally others in quiet meetings at their kitchen table. Shaq, still a boy then, remembered hearing the muffled voices through the walls, the tense silences that followed. But he hadn't understood the weight of those conversations until now. Reading his father's words, Shaq felt the sting of shame, of not realizing how much his father had carried, how much he had sacrificed to shield him from the ugly truths. Another entry spoke of a night when his father had come home late, shoulders hunched, the smell of rain clinging to his jacket. Shaq had asked him why he looked so tired, and his father had forced a smile, saying it was just a long day. But the journal revealed that on that night, his father had stood alone in a dark parking lot, staring down men who'd warned him to keep his mouth shut, not with threats of violence, but with promises of ruin. His reputation, his family's stability, all would be stripped away if he didn't walk away from the fight. Shaq's jaw tightened as he read. His father had been offered a way out, a seat at the table, a share in the profits, if he'd just stay quiet. But the journal's ink was dark with defiance. His father had refused, choosing integrity over comfort, justice over complicity. Shaq felt a surge of pride, mingled with regret that he'd never told his father how much he admired his strength. The flashbacks played out in Shaq's mind as vividly as a reel of film. He remembered standing in doorways, watching his father's silhouette outlined by dim kitchen light, his voice hushed but fierce as he spoke to trusted friends about fighting back. He recalled being pulled aside at school when a teacher's tone shifted from polite to patronizing, and his father's firm hand on his shoulder, reminding him to stand tall, to speak with respect even when it wasn't returned. These moments, fragmented and unspoken for years, now stitched together with the thread of his father's words in the journal, painted a portrait of a man far more complex than Shaq had ever realized. As he turned the pages, a particular entry made his breath catch. His father wrote of a recording, a tape he'd made the night before, a crucial meeting, one that documented conversations, threats and promises that could expose the entire scheme. The journal described how he'd hidden the recording, not just to protect himself, but to safeguard the truth. He'd feared what might happen if it was found, but he couldn't bear to let the evidence disappear. Shaq's pulse quickened. The idea of a hidden recording sent a jolt of urgency through his chest. His father had left a breadcrumb trail, a map not just of his thoughts, but of tangible proof. Shaq's mind raced with questions. Where was the tape hidden? Who else knew about it? And why, after all these years, had no one spoken of it until now? He read the journal's closing lines for that entry, his father's words trembling with a mix of resolve and fear. If you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to finish what I started. But the fight isn't over. There's still time. Follow the signs. Find the truth. Let it speak. Shaq closed the journal gently, the weight of its contents settling into his bones. He leaned back in the seat, staring out at the cemetery, at the gravestone that marked not just his father's death, but the silencing of a man who'd refused to bend. His fists clenched against his thighs, the echoes of his father's voice swirling through his mind. This wasn't just about remembering. It was about uncovering the truth his father had fought to preserve, about finishing what had been started. And as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Shaq knew the next move was his. He had to find that recording before it disappeared into the shadows for good. Shaq sat in the driver's seat, the journal heavy on his lap, his mind swirling with the revelations etched into its pages. His knuckles tightened around the leather, thoughts racing faster than the fading light outside. The shadows stretched across the cemetery, creeping up gravestones like silent warnings. He exhaled sharply, about to start the car and leave the weight of the day behind when his phone buzzed against the center console. Unknown number. His finger hovered over the screen, hesitation tightening his throat. Then, with a resigned breath, he tapped to answer. The voice on the other end was soft, tinged with urgency, but layered with something more fragile guilt. "Shaq," the woman said. "Shaq O'Neal." He frowned, instinctively glancing around as if the voice might materialize from the dusk. "Yeah. Who's this?" The woman's breath hitched, as though she hadn't quite prepared to hear his voice. "It's Valerie. Valerie Cook." She stopped, gathering her thoughts. "I knew your father. We were close. He trusted me. I should have called you sooner, but I wasn't sure if it was safe." Shaq's grip on the journal tightened. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Follow the signs. Find the truth." "What are you talking about?" he asked, voice low, wary, but laced with curiosity. Valerie's voice trembled. "I know where the recording is, the one your father mentioned in his journal. I was there the night he hid it. I helped him." Shaq's heart lurched. His mind conjured 1,000 questions at once. "Why are you telling me this now?" he demanded, suspicion threading through his tone. "I thought it was over," she said, her words almost a whisper. "I thought when he passed, it would all die with him. But they're still out there, Shaq. The people who wanted him silenced, they never stopped watching. And now you're asking questions, which means they'll be watching you too." The weight of her words sank into his chest like a stone. His father's warnings, the journal, Ruben's strange appearance at the gravesite, it all connected, each thread tightening into a knot he hadn't seen coming. "Where is it?" he asked quietly. Valerie hesitated, her voice breaking with the strain of what she was about to reveal. "I can't say over the phone. It's not safe. They still listen. But I'll meet you. There's a place, an old diner off the highway. Safe, quiet. We can talk there face to face." Shaq ran a hand over his face, the weight of the day bearing down on him. The air inside the car felt thick, the journal pulsing against his thigh like a heartbeat. "Why should I trust you?" he said, the question rough but not unkind. "Because your father did," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Because I owe him, and you deserve to know the truth he died protecting. Meet me there, please." Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the faint static of the line. Shaq's eyes closed briefly, memories of his father's steady presence surfacing unbidden. A man who tried to change the game off the court. Ruben's words echoed in his mind, merging with the journal's confessions and the shadowy warnings left unsaid. Finally, with a slow breath, he spoke. "Where's the diner?" "About 10 miles east, just past the old gas station," she said quickly, as though afraid she might lose her nerve. "It's called the Rusty Spoon. Come alone. I'll be there." The call ended abruptly, leaving Shaq staring at the darkened screen. His fingers hovered over the phone, tempted to call her back, to demand more answers, but he knew it would be pointless. She'd said what she could, and the rest would have to come face to face. He started the car, the engine rumbling to life as he glanced once more at the gravestone outside. His father's name glistened faintly in the dimming light, the carved letters a silent reminder of everything he was about to uncover. He placed the journal on the passenger seat and eased onto the road, his mind racing ahead to the rusty spoon, to Valerie, to the recording that could crack open the past like a fault line. As he drove, the landscape shifted from quiet suburbia to stretches of empty road, lined with skeletal trees. The headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating patches of cracked asphalt and overgrown grass. Shaq's thoughts tangled with old memories. Childhood dinners where his father's laughter masked exhaustion. Nights spent listening to stories about how justice wasn't given, but fought for. The journal's weight felt heavier now, as if it carried not just his father's words but a legacy of resistance, of truths buried beneath layers of silence. He glanced at it again, thinking of Valerie's voice, the way it cracked under pressure, hinting at a history she'd kept hidden for too long. He wondered what kind of woman she was, what secrets she carried, and whether the meeting at the Rusty Spoon would finally bring clarity, or only deepen the shadows. The car's headlights caught the flicker of an old weathered sign, the Rusty Spoon. The diner sat like a relic from another era, its neon glow flickering uncertainly against the encroaching dark. Shaq pulled into the lot, his heart a steady thud in his chest, his thoughts sharpened by the weight of what lay ahead. He shut off the engine, gripping the journal as if it were the only tether to a truth long buried. He stepped into the night, the air sharp against his skin, his breath visible in the cooling air. Somewhere inside the diner, Valerie waited, her voice threaded with urgency and guilt, a woman ready to crack open the secrets of the past. Shaq felt the moment stretch out before him, heavy with the weight of what was to come. And as he crossed the cracked pavement toward the door, he realized this wasn't just about his father anymore. It was about finding the truth before it disappeared into silence forever. The diner smelled of stale coffee and grilled onions, a lingering scent of conversations long past. Shaq stepped inside, his shoulders tensed, scanning the dimly lit booths and chipped linoleum floor. The glow of a single neon light flickered near the counter, illuminating the face of a woman seated in a back corner booth. Valerie Kook. Her posture was tight, hands clenched around a chipped ceramic mug, knuckles white with the strain of holding something far heavier than it looked. Shaq crossed the room, each step echoing louder than the last. He slid into the booth across from her, resting the journal on the table between them. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to his face, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence pulsed like a held breath, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, Valerie broke the stillness, her voice raw with tension. "He never told you, did he?" she said softly. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug, her nails tapping a slow, nervous rhythm. "About the deals, about the real reason he couldn't just walk away." Shaq leaned in, his voice low but insistent. "He told me enough, but not the whole story." She let out a bitter laugh, a sound that didn't touch her eyes. "That's because the whole story could have gotten you both killed. Your father thought he could play both sides, stay in the game long enough to protect his family while still trying to tear down the system from the inside. But he underestimated how far they'd go to silence him." Shaq's pulse quickened, memories of his father's warnings threading through his mind. "Who's they?" he pressed, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. Valerie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Clayton Rourke," she said finally, her voice cracking like dry wood. "A real estate tycoon, with deep pockets and dirtier hands. He had the mayor, the city council, even some of the community leaders in his pocket. Your father found out about a land deal, something that would have displaced hundreds of black families from their homes under the guise of redevelopment. He tried to stop it. He gathered evidence, made recordings, wrote everything down. But Rourke had eyes everywhere." Shaq's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists beneath the table. "Why didn't anyone stop him? Why didn't my father go public with what he knew?" Valerie's eyes glistened with something that wasn't quite tears, but was close enough. "He tried," she whispered. "But every time he got close, someone leaked his plans. He didn't know who to trust. And then came the threats. They didn't come with fists or guns. They came with paperwork, with contracts that bled him dry, with rumors that painted him as unstable, unreliable. They came with warnings whispered in his ear when he was alone, when you were asleep. They told him if he didn't back off, it wouldn't just be him who paid the price." The weight of her words settled over the table like a heavy shroud. Shaq stared at the journal, the cracks in the leather cover now seeming like fractures in his understanding of the man who'd raised him. "So he stayed quiet to protect us," Shaq said, his voice low, raw with guilt and realization. Valerie nodded, her hands trembling slightly. He thought he could wait them out, that maybe if he stayed quiet long enough they'd move on. But they didn't. They just tightened the noose. And when he refused to play by their rules, they cut him out completely. The last thing he did was hide that recording. It's the only thing that can still expose them. Shaq's mind raced. Where is it? Valerie hesitated, glancing toward the window where the flicker of headlights passed in the distance. It's hidden, somewhere they'd never think to look. But you'll need this. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small rusted key, placing it gently on the table. Its metal was pitted and rough, but it gleamed faintly under the diner's dim light. Shaq picked it up, turning it over in his hand, the weight of it grounding him. What does it unlock? He asked, his voice tight with urgency. Valerie leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's an old safe in the basement of the community center, the same one where your father used to hold meetings. It's hidden behind a false wall in one of the storage rooms. The key opens it. Inside you'll find the tape. It has everything. Names, dates, conversations. Enough to bring Rourke down, and everyone tied to him. Shaq's breath caught. The pieces were falling into place, the journal's cryptic references now sharpening into focus. But with the clarity came a surge of dread. If this information was so dangerous, why had Valerie waited until now to reveal it? As if sensing his thoughts, Valerie's voice cracked. I was scared, she admitted, her fingers tightening around the mug. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone. But they didn't. They sent people to remind me, subtle things, anonymous calls, strange cars parked outside my house, my mail tampered with. They're watching me too. That's why you have to take it from here, Shaq. You're the only one who can finish what your father started. Shaq's pulse thundered in his ears. The thought of stepping into the same danger that had haunted his father and now Valerie gnawed at him. But he knew he couldn't turn away. Not now, not after everything he'd learned. He rose from the booth, the journal under his arm, the key clenched tightly in his hand. Valerie's eyes met his, a mixture of fear and hope flickering behind them. Be careful, she said softly. Rourke won't let this go quietly. Once you open that safe, you'll be in deeper than you can imagine. Shaq gave a faint nod, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. I'm not afraid of the truth, he said. He turned and walked out into the night, the rusted key biting into his palm, the weight of his father's legacy pressing against his spine. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The warehouse loomed ahead like a rusted skeleton against the twilight sky, its corrugated metal siding groaning softly in the wind. Shaq gripped the steering wheel tighter as he pulled the car to a stop beneath a flickering street lamp. Jalen sat in the passenger seat, his face tight with unease, eyes scanning the shadowed loading docks and the maze of stacked crates beyond. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the warehouse walls a whisper of the secrets buried within. You sure about this, Shaq? Jalen asked quietly, his voice low but steady. He wasn't just Shaq's friend. He was the one person Shaq trusted when the ground started to shift beneath his feet. But tonight, even Jalen's usual calm seemed frayed. Shaq nodded, gripping the small, rusted key Valerie had given him. It's the only way, he said, his voice rough with determination. The safe was here, hidden behind walls that had once held the promise of community gatherings, now reduced to silence and dust. They stepped into the warehouse, their footsteps echoing over the cracked concrete floor. The air smelled of old oil and mildew, and faint shafts of moonlight sliced through the broken windows high above. Shaq's breath came in slow, controlled draws, his senses sharpening with each step. He wasn't just here to retrieve a hidden recording. He was stepping into the hollowed-out shell of his father's legacy, the place where decisions had been made and secrets had been buried. They moved through the labyrinth of rusted machinery and forgotten crates, their footsteps cautious but purposeful. Jalen kept glancing over his shoulder, the weight of unspoken questions pressing between them. You think they know we're here? He murmured, barely loud enough for Shaq to hear. Shaq's jaw tightened. If they don't now, they will soon. He stopped at a faded door marked with peeling paint, and the faint outline of what once might have been a community logo. Sliding the key into the lock, he felt the subtle give as the mechanism clicked open. The door swung inward with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadow. They hesitated at the threshold, the weight of the unknown pressing against them. But then, voices echoed faintly from the other end of the warehouse. The low murmur of men, their footsteps slow but deliberate. Jalen's eyes widened, and Shaq's heart rate quickened.
"They're here," Jalen said under his breath.
Shaq didn't waste time. He stepped inside the doorway, pulling Jalen with him, and shutting the door just as the distant voices grew louder. They descended the staircase quickly, the darkness swallowing them as they moved deeper into the heart of the warehouse. The walls were rough with years of neglect. But at the bottom of the stairs they found a small, windowless room with shelves stacked haphazardly with dusty boxes and broken equipment. Shaq scanned the walls, his memory pulling at the descriptions in his father's journal. The false wall would be subtle, something overlooked by even the most thorough search. His eyes caught a faint line in the brickwork, a hairline fracture, running vertically, slightly offset from the rest. He pressed his palm against it, feeling for any shift. Jalen stepped closer, glancing anxiously at the stairwell. "We don't have much time," he warned, the urgency in his voice palpable. Shaq's fingers found a small latch, embedded in the mortar, cleverly disguised to blend with the brick. With a firm twist, the section of wall gave way, revealing a narrow compartment hidden within. Inside, nestled between a crumpled cloth and a sealed envelope, was an old cassette tape, its label worn but legible. Shaq's breath caught as he reached for it, the weight of the discovery sinking into his bones. Before they could examine it further, the sound of footsteps on the stairs sent a jolt through them. Jalen motioned silently toward a side door half hidden behind a stack of crates. Without a word, they slipped through it, the tape clutched tightly in Shaq's hand. They emerged into an adjacent section of the warehouse, the faint glow of emergency exit signs guiding them through the maze. The voices from above grew fainter, muffled by distance and walls, but Shaq knew they wouldn't stay that way for long. They moved quickly, relying on instinct and the thin thread of moonlight spilling through cracks in the roof. Finally, they reached the back exit, pushing the heavy door open just wide enough to slip through into the night. The cool air hit them like a wave, sharp and bracing. They didn't stop moving until they reached the car, breathless but intact. Shaq slid into the driver's seat, the cassette tape cradled in his hand like a relic. Jalen climbed in beside him, his chest rising and falling with quiet urgency. "You got it?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline. Shaq nodded, his eyes locked on the tape. "I got it," he said, but there was a strange weight to his voice, a mixture of triumph and dread. Jalen noticed it too. "What's wrong?" Shaq swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. "This tape, it's not what I expected. My father's journal made it sound like it was just a recording of their plans, their deals. But I think there's more on here. Something he couldn't write down, something he couldn't say out loud." The air between them thickened with the unspoken. Shaq slid the tape into the glove compartment, his mind already spinning with possibilities. The sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon, but the darkness around them felt alive, pulsing with the weight of a truth waiting to be heard. Jalen met his gaze, his voice quiet but steady. "Then we'd better be ready for what's next." Shaq turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. They pulled away from the warehouse, the forgotten building shrinking in the rearview mirror, leaving behind its secrets and stepping into the next chapter of a story that was only just beginning. The car's engine hummed softly beneath the weight of Shaq's thoughts as he drove into the quiet stretch of road, the cassette tape heavy in his jacket pocket. The night air pressed in against the windows, cool and silent except for the occasional whisper of wind. Jalen sat in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, but Shaq could feel the tension radiating off him in sharp waves. Neither of them spoke as they left the forgotten warehouse behind, both trapped in their own tangled thoughts. When they finally pulled into Shaq's driveway, the house looming dark and still against the night, he killed the engine. They sat in silence for a beat longer, the tape between them like an unspoken challenge. Finally, Shaq reached over and grabbed the old tape player from the glove compartment, sliding the cassette into place with a decisive click. The machine whirred softly, and a moment later his father's voice filled the car. At first the words were calm, measured, like a man explaining something to himself more than anyone else. "If you're hearing this, it means the world didn't let me tell my truth," his father's voice said, rich with quiet resolve. "It means they silenced me, but not my story. I need you to know what I couldn't say aloud." Shaq's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the familiar cadence of his father's voice cutting deep into the marrow of his bones. But as the recording played on, the tone shifted, and so did the message. "There was someone close to me," his father continued, his voice thickening with regret. "Someone I trusted, someone who knew everything, the deals, the threats, the pressure. I thought he was with me. I thought he had my back. But he turned, sold me out to Rourke and his people. It wasn't just fear or money. It was loyalty to the wrong side. Shaq's breath caught, his gaze flicking to Jalen, who had gone completely still. His father's voice kept going, unwavering in its confession. That man's name was Jalen Thomas, my friend, my confidant, the one who sat at my table and promised to protect my family. But he was working for Rourke all along, feeding them everything they needed to stay ahead of me. And now I'm leaving this truth for you, Shaq, because you deserve to know who really stood in our way. The tape hissed into silence, leaving a vacuum of sound that felt heavier than a shout. Shaq's mind reeled, the familiar contours of his friendship with Jalen now blurred and cracked like shattered glass. The man sitting next to him, his confidant, his partner in the search for truth, was now painted with betrayal. Jalen's voice was low, strained. Shaq, it's not what you think. Shaq turned to him slowly, the lines around his mouth tight, his jaw clenched. Not what I think. My father called you out by name. He said you sold him out, that you've been feeding information to Rourke this whole time. How long have you been playing me, Jalen? Jalen's face twisted with a mix of guilt and desperation. I didn't have a choice, he said hoarsely. Your dad was in deep, too deep. Rourke's people came after me. They said they'd ruin everything, destroy my family if I didn't cooperate. At first it was just small things, little leaks. I didn't know it would spiral like it did. Shaq's fists tightened against the steering wheel. You were supposed to have his back. You were supposed to have mine. Jalen's voice cracked. I know I messed up, but I didn't know how to stop. I thought maybe I could steer it, control the damage, but they were always a step ahead. They used me, Shaq. And when I realized how deep it went, it was too late. The betrayal twisted in Shaq's chest, sharp and raw. Memories flashed through his mind. Jalen helping him piece together clues, standing by his side at the warehouse, acting as if they were in it together. But now, every shared look, every hushed conversation, felt tainted. The truth wasn't just about Rourke or the recording. It was about trust, about how deeply betrayal could burrow into the cracks of a life. Before Shaq could demand more answers, a shadow flickered past the car's headlights, and a sharp knock rattled the driver's side window. Reuben stood there, his face taut with urgency. Shaq lowered the window, his voice flat with a mix of exhaustion and suspicion. What now, Reuben? Reuben's eyes flicked between Shaq and Jalen, his jaw tight. There's something you both need to hear. Rourke's tightening his net. He knows you found the tape. He's not waiting for you to make the next move. He's making his own. Jalen's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. What do you mean? Reuben's voice was low, deliberate. I mean, he's setting up a fall for both of you. He's got people ready to pin everything on Shaq, paint him as the one who orchestrated the whole mess. The tape won't clear his name. It'll bury him if it comes out the wrong way. And as for you, Jalen, he's already decided you're expendable. The weight of Reuben's words settled into the car like a cold, heavy stone. Shaq's pulse pounded in his ears. The betrayal of Jalen, mingling with the looming threat from Rourke. The path ahead was narrowing, the lines between ally and enemy blurring into a dangerous tangle. Reuben leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. If you want to make it out of this, you'll need more than the tape. You'll need to outplay him at his own game. But you're running out of time, Shaq. You need to decide who you're willing to trust, and how far you're willing to go. Shaq's gaze flicked from Reuben's hardened expression to Jalen's stricken face, the cassette tape sitting like a loaded gun between them. The truth was out, but the danger was far from over. The night felt heavier than before, the kind of weight that wasn't just in the air but in every breath Shaq took. The wind rattled the branches outside his home, as he sat with Reuben and Jalen at the kitchen table, the cassette tape placed carefully in the center like it was a fragile relic. Valerie joined them not long after, her face pale beneath the porch light. Together they formed an uneasy circle, each one carrying secrets, guilt, or a desperate hope for redemption. Reuben's voice broke the silence first, low and steady. You need to understand something, Shaq. Jalen didn't betray you out of choice. Rourke's syndicate had him trapped. They used fear leverage over his family, financial ruin, every card they had. It was designed to make him think he had no other option. But even Rourke's web has holes. His control is slipping. Jalen's head was bowed, his voice quiet, almost broken. I thought I could steer things away from the worst. I was wrong. But if I hadn't fed them bits of information, they would have come down harder on your father, Shaq. I was trying to buy time, but I only made it worse. Shaq's eyes locked on Jalen, anger still simmering beneath the surface, but he could see the cracks of guilt threading through his friend's words. Betrayal hurt, but so did the realization that Jalen had been caught in a snare, designed by Rourke to fracture loyalties and control narratives. Valerie leaned forward, her voice threading through the tension. Your father wasn't just recording conversations or documenting corruption, she said. He left behind something bigger, a document, one that ties together Rourke's network. It's not just local officials or real estate deals. It's a full map of how the money moved, the connections, the paper trail. If we can get our hands on that, we can expose the entire operation. Reuben nodded. That's the real prize. The tape might implicate Rourke and a few of his puppets, but the document your father hid, that could burn down the whole house. It's why Rourke's men have been circling you, why Valerie's been followed, and why they tried to twist Jalen into their pawn. Shaq's pulse quickened. He glanced at the journal sitting near the tape. His father's words echoed in his mind. Find the truth. Let it speak. There had been hints, cryptic references to a file, something hidden deeper than the tape. A name came to him, rising from the fog of memory. The document, Shaq said, his voice low but certain. It's at the old law office, isn't it? The place where Dad used to meet with his old friend, Harold Kincaid. He mentioned it in his journal, said there was a place he trusted more than anyone else. Valerie's eyes widened with recognition. Yes. Harold was one of the last people who stood by him, even when the walls were closing in. If your father left anything behind, it would be there. Rourke might suspect, but he can't risk drawing attention to the law office. It's too public, too many eyes. Jalen finally lifted his gaze, his voice tentative. If we can get the document, we can flip the narrative, expose everything before Rourke has a chance to silence us. But he's not going to sit back and watch us take it. Reuben's expression darkened. Rourke's power is built on control, on making people think he's untouchable. If we hit him with the truth in the right way, publicly and undeniably, we can break that illusion. But we need to move carefully, fast, but smart. Shaq stood, the old floorboards creaking under his weight. His hands were fists at his sides, his pulse steady despite the storm gathering outside. Then we go to the law office, he said firmly. We get the document, and we bring the whole thing into the light. No more shadow, no more running. Valerie rose too, her voice steady. I'll come with you. I've seen enough of Rourke's games. It's time to end them. Jalen hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. I owe you more than I can ever fix, he said quietly. But if you'll have me, I'm in. Shaq met his gaze, the anger in his chest loosening just enough to make room for determination. We'll settle the past later, he said. Right now, we finish what my father started. Reuben pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, a rough map of the law office's layout. We'll need to split up once we're inside. I know the building. It's old, with hidden rooms. The files likely in a locked cabinet in Harold's private office, behind a panel in the floor. Shaq nodded, already planning the moves in his head. The stakes were clear. They had one shot to outmaneuver Rourke and his people, to grab the document and reveal the truth. But the lines between friend and enemy had blurred, and trust was as fragile as the paper they were chasing. As the group gathered their things and prepared to leave, Reuben's voice cut through the tension. A final warning. Once we move, there's no turning back. Rourke will come at us with everything he's got. Be ready for that. Shaq tightened his grip on the journal, the weight of his father's legacy pressing against his chest. I'm ready, he said quietly. For all of it. They stepped into the night, the shadows closing around them, as they headed toward the truth, toward a confrontation that would decide more than just their futures. It would decide whose story would be heard, and whose would be silenced forever. The sun blazed overhead, the sky a crisp blue that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. Shaq stood at the edge of the stage, erected in the heart of the city's central plaza, the journal tucked under his arm, and the old cassette player gripped tightly in his hand. The air was thick with the murmurs of the gathered crowd. Community leaders, neighbors, journalists with cameras poised, and even those who had once whispered behind closed doors about his family's legacy. They'd all come for the event meant to honor his father, a commemoration Rourke's people had orchestrated to polish their own image. But Shaq knew today wasn't about honoring the past. It was about revealing the truth that had been buried with it. Valerie and Ruben stood just off stage, their faces tight with the weight of what was about to unfold. Jalen lingered nearby, his expression pale but resolute, the burden of his past missteps shadowing his features. Rourke's enforcers were there too, their suits sharp and their eyes hard, pretending to blend in but standing out like wolves in a pasture. The host of the event, a well-dressed councilwoman, with a practiced smile tapped the microphone, her voice ringing out over the speakers. We are here today to celebrate the life and contributions of a man who gave so much to this community. A visionary, a leader, a father. She turned toward Shaq, beckoning him forward. And now it is my honor to invite his son Shaquille O'Neal to share a few words. Shaq's heart thundered in his chest as he stepped onto the stage, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, the cameras, the crowd, the hidden glances from Rourke's people. He inhaled deeply, the journal pressing against his ribs like a silent reminder of the legacy he was about to defend. He stood at the microphone, the hum of feedback breaking the silence. For a moment, he simply looked out at the crowd, at the familiar faces, and the unfamiliar ones. Then, in a voice steady and low, he began. My father was a man who believed in this community, he said, his words resonating through the speakers, quieting the murmurs below. He believed that we deserved better opportunities, better respect, better lives, and he fought for that, even when the odds were stacked against him. A ripple of acknowledgement passed through the crowd, heads nodding, expressions shifting from polite attention to genuine engagement. Shaq continued, his voice growing stronger. But what most of you don't know is the price he paid for standing up for those beliefs. The deals he tried to stop, the voices he tried to raise against corruption, the warnings he gave that were ignored, until it was too late. He held up the cassette player, the tape inside like a loaded secret. This is my father's voice, he said. The story he wasn't allowed to tell. The proof he left behind, hoping someone would listen when he no longer could. A hush settled over the plaza, the crowd leaning in as Shaq pressed the play button. His father's voice crackled to life, steady and unwavering despite the years that had passed. They tried to silence me, his father's voice said, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. The deals you see as progress are built on broken promises. The men behind them, Clayton Rourke and his associates, profit off the displacement of families, the erasure of our history, the betrayal of our trust. The words struck like a thunderclap, drawing gasps and whispers from the crowd. Faces turned toward one another in shock. Journalists scrambling to capture the moment, microphones thrust closer. Shaq let the recording play, his father's voice detailing the names, the dates, the plans, everything laid bare for the world to hear. The weight of the revelation hung in the air, undeniable and raw. But Rourke's enforcers weren't idle. Shaq could see them shifting, murmuring into earpieces, their gazes sharp as they edged toward the stage. Valerie and Ruben stood their ground at the side, their presence a silent warning that Shaq wasn't alone. Still, the tension coiled tighter, a wire stretched to its breaking point. As the tape ended, Shaq's voice rang out, louder now, infused with the fire of defiance. This isn't just my father's story, he said. It's our story, our community's story. We've been silenced, manipulated, pushed aside for too long. But today the truth stands in the light, where it belongs, and we won't be silenced anymore. The crowd erupted into applause, cheers rising like a wave crashing against the dam of secrecy. Even the councilwoman who had introduced Shaq seemed caught off guard, her polished smile faltering as she glanced nervously at the cameras capturing every second. Rourke's men moved toward the stage, but before they could reach him, Valerie stepped forward, her voice clear and cutting through the noise. Everything has been documented, she called out, and copies have already been distributed. You can't bury the truth again. Ruben nodded in agreement, his eyes locking on the nearest enforcer with a look of quiet challenge. You'd better think twice before making a move. The air snapped with electricity, the crowd's energy swelling into something that felt unstoppable. Shaq stood tall, the journal still under his arm, the tape player held high. He felt a surge of pride, of connection, not just to his father's memory, but to the people gathered here, the community that had long been kept in the dark. Just as the tension seemed ready to crack wide open, a figure emerged from the edge of the crowd. Shaq's breath caught, his heart stuttering in his chest, as he recognized the woman pushing through the throng. It was Lucille, his mother, the woman who had walked away years ago, her absence leaving a hollow space in his life that he had long since learned to live with. She stepped onto the stage, her eyes locking on his, her expression unreadable. The crowd fell into a stunned silence as she approached, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "There's more you need to know, Shaq," she said, her words like a thread pulling tight around the edges of the moment. "About your father. About me. About why I had to leave." The air seemed to still, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Shaq's world tilted, the foundation of everything he thought he knew shifting beneath his feet. His mother's return wasn't just a twist in the story. It was a revelation that threatened to rewrite everything. And as the plaza held its breath, waiting for what would come next, Shaq realized that the reckoning wasn't over. It was only beginning. The plaza remained suspended in silence. As Lucille stood beside Shaq, her presence heavy with a past unspoken for too long. Her eyes shimmered with the weight of the years they'd spent apart, with the burden of truths that had lingered in the shadows. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough strength to slice through the stunned quiet. "I left because I had to," she said, her gaze flickering between Shaq and the faces in the crowd. "Your father and I, we made choices we thought would protect you. I wasn't just running from him. I was running from what he was up against, from the people who made it clear they wouldn't stop until he was silent, until you were too." Shaq's pulse quickened, his thoughts tangling as he tried to reconcile the woman who'd left him with the one standing here now, speaking truths that felt too sharp to bear. "You knew about all of this?" he asked, his voice low, trembling between anger and understanding. Lucille nodded, her lips tightening. "I knew enough to see that if I stayed, they would have used me to get to him. To you, I thought if I disappeared they'd leave us alone. But they never did. They just changed the game, found other ways to pull the strings. Your father and I, we both made mistakes. But he never stopped fighting, and neither did I. I've been working behind the scenes, trying to keep you safe, trying to keep the truth alive. I just couldn't face you until now." The ache in Shaq's chest twisted, raw and aching with the weight of lost years, and the hollow spaces left by words never said. He wanted to shout, to demand why she hadn't trusted him, but the weariness in her eyes, the years of hiding, the quiet desperation, stilled his anger. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low. "I needed you," he said simply. Her breath caught, a tremor running through her, as she reached out, her hand hesitating before brushing his arm. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm sorry." For a long moment, they stood there, the crowd fading into the background, the weight of years folding between them. Then, slowly, Shaq wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a hesitant but fierce embrace. The air felt heavier, the sound of cameras clicking, capturing the reunion not as a spectacle, but as a testament to resilience and forgiveness. The applause was subdued, respectful, as the community bore witness to a fracture healing in real time. As they stepped back, Lucille's voice steadied, her gaze turning sharp. "There's one more thing. Your father's fight wasn't just about the recordings or the documents. It was about giving this community the courage to stand up, to push back against the forces that thought they could erase us. You've done that today, but it's not over. This truth needs to live on in all of us." Shaq nodded, understanding settling into his bones. His father's voice, his mother's choices, the sacrifices that had been made, all of it was a mosaic of struggle, pain, and unwavering resolve. And now, it was his turn to carry that legacy forward. The stage lights dimmed as the crowd slowly dispersed, their faces illuminated by the glow of phone screens, capturing the moment. Shaq stepped down from the platform, the journal clutched in one hand, the tape player in the other. Valerie and Ruben waited by the exit, their expressions a mixture of relief and determination. Even Jalen lingered nearby, his guilt lingering but his loyalty now tempered by the hard truths they'd uncovered together. But Shaq didn't stop to speak. Instead, he walked through the thinning crowd, each step measured, until he found himself back at the cemetery where it had all begun. The camera crew, still trailing him like silent witnesses, set up quietly nearby, their lenses reflecting the fading light. He knelt at his father's grave, the cool breeze stirring the grass around the simple stone marker. He set the journal gently on the earth, the tape player resting atop it like an offering. His voice was low, steady, carrying not just to the cameras but to the memory of the man who had shaped him. "Dad," he said softly, "I didn't understand everything you were fighting for. I thought you were just trying to protect me. But now I see you were trying to protect all of us. You were standing up for something bigger than yourself, bigger than me." And even though they tried to silence you, your voice still got through. It got through to me. He drew a shaky breath, the emotions cresting but held steady. You taught me that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you fight for. And I'm gonna keep fighting, Dad. I'm gonna make sure they can't bury the truth again. Not ever. As he stood, the camera crew kept rolling, capturing the quiet dignity of his resolve, the raw edge of his voice blending with the rustle of leaves, and the soft murmur of the breeze. Lucille joined him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent promise that she too was ready to stand by his eyes now. Together they turned to face the horizon, the city stretching out before them bathed in the golden glow of sunset. The story wasn't over. The reckoning had begun, but so had the redemption. And as the cameras caught their silhouettes against the fading light, Shaq's final words rang out, not just to his father, but to everyone willing to listen. "Let the truth be heard," he said, his voice resonant with quiet strength, "and let justice be done." The cameras continued to roll, immortalizing the moment, when a son claimed his father's legacy, when a community stood united, and when silence was broken once and for all. If you think this story is over, think again. The truth is out there, but it's only the beginning. Secrets unravel, shadows fall, and the fight for justice is far from finished. Stay sharp, because what's coming next will change everything. Keep your eyes open.